Selma is a symbol of resistance. It's in the heart of the Black Belt. People live there with a great deal of fear. And people had worked very hard to organize people. We had sit-ins at restaurants and lunch counters. People had organized efforts to register to vote. And we made the decision, at least some people in SCLC and others made the decision that we should have a march, that there should be some type of protest from Selma to Montgomery.
The obstacles for voting rights were just almost insurmountable. You know, to have a Black person to go register to vote could mean that they could lose their job, or they could lose their home. I think one of the famous cases of that is in Mississippi when Fannie Lou Hamer had registered to vote. She was thrown off of her farm where she and her family were working and thrown out of their house. So that's just a simple one of many, many examples. It was dangerous to even attempt to register to vote.
I worked with voter registration. I went to Gadsden, teaching voter registration in rural areas, and all of the people that were working went downtown Gadsden, and we were protesting, and that's when I got arrested. And in Gadsden, they had the little cattle prods. They didn't use the dogs and the hose. They had this little rod about this long that had a charge. So when they came to me, they didn't have to stick me because I ran in the paddock wagon. But it was amazing that they would put those on a human being. We would go from door to door, knocking, trying to get people to study the Constitution of the United States in order to pass the test that you had to pass in order to become a registered voter.
They had all kind of questions to ask you. You know, like you had to know the Constitution of the United States. And that's not an easy thing to remember. But they were asking all these old people all these questions. I had to study for it too, but at the time I started voting, I was young. I was in my 20s. But I had to study up on it to make sure I knew these questions.
Oh yeah, they want to know because you recite the Constitution of the United States. I could recite it backwards and forward then. I could do better with it then than I can now.
My mother had like third or fourth grade education. She don't know nothing about the Constitution of the United States. And Eloise said that's what she had to help prepare them for those stupid questions that they would ask them, you know. How many seeds in a watermelon, just stupid stuff. Anything to be able to make them ineligible to vote.
They had to answer questions like how many jelly beans in a jar that was put before them.
They had a whole sugar in a glass. Want to know how many grains of sugar in here. I asked them just like they asked me. I said, as many as you think, because neither one of us know.
I went up there to vote, and they had a rope, a lineup that said, the color on this side, white on that side, just a rope. And there was a white man on this side, and I was on this side. And I went up there, and very simple. How you doing, sir? Talking to the white fellow standing right here with this rope. What was the Constitution of the United States signed with a pen or a feather? He said a feather. You're right, good. Congratulations, ready to vote. Right there to me. What was the Constitution of the United States signed with a pen or a feather? I said, it's very simple, a feather, like that fellow said. She knows a pen.
When I was going into my senior year of law school, my mother told me that I needed to become a registered voter. During that time, you had a law that said that the Board of Registrars could administer literacy tests to you. Anyway, I went down and I filled out the application, and I put on there that I was a second-year student going into my third year at the State University of New York School of Law. Well, there were 3 people there, 2 men and a woman. The woman was the one that administered the literacy test to me. Now, to me, I thought that was ridiculous because I'm in law school. I can read and write. I had to because I filled the application out. So she said to me, would you explain the 14th Amendment? I had just finished a year's course of constitutional law. My wife says that I exaggerate this every time I tell the story, but I told them about every case that I could remember that Dean Hyman, who taught constitutional law, had us to study and to recite. And I told them that. I guess I kept them there for 30 or 40 minutes. And neither one of the 3 had the slightest idea of what I was talking about. But it sounded right to them. And so the lady said, how did you know that? I said, well, ma'am, if you had read my application, you would have seen that I'm a rising third-year law student. And so the lady looked at me in amazement. She threw her hands up and she slammed them down on the table. She says, oh, hell, just let this nigga vote. That's a true story.
We had to pay poll tax in order to register to vote.
They wanted to pay poll tax where they thought some people wouldn't be able to vote, because seems right back there, $1 was something, and they figured if they said you had to pay $1.50 to vote, that was too much to pay, especially when they really needed it to live day by day.
That was one of the obstacles, and the other was a lot of people in the rural areas did not have cars, and they could not, even after, preparing to take the test, we had to get people out into those areas to carry them to the courthouse to take the test.
Also, the voters registration office was not open all the time.
During this period, 62, 63, somewhere in there, the Board of Registrars began to purge the voting rolls of black men that were voters. And they used as their excuse the fact that they had committed crimes of moral turpitude. Well, the men had not committed any criminal offense, but there was a statute that allowed a person to get a divorce based on cruelty. Most of those cases were mental cruelty. They said, the Board of Registrars said that they had beaten their wives. Physical cruelty. And so I represented, more than 100 of them. And I went and I got the records from the equity court in the last 5 years and showed that there were more against white men than there were against black men, and no white men had been brought in before the Board of Registrars to purge them from the voter rolls. So I put a stop to that.
There were efforts to try to play with the system, but soon I think people realized that that was not going to work. There needed to be a frontal attack on voting rights. It was not only did we want to desegregate, but we wanted to have full voting rights. And so that was going to be the big focus of Dr. King's group. In Selma, there had already been a group of people working in the whole area of Dallas County, Peary County, the Black Belt, where segregation was just, and poverty was rampant.
Selma was the leading city in the Black Belt. And there were only maybe at most 15 blacks that were voters in Selma.
SNCC had been, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had been in Selma since 1963. In late 1964, the Dallas County Voters League invited Dr. King to come in and work with them in support of voting rights. I was one of two new ministers who were asked by the UUA in January to come to Selma. Ira Blaylock and I arrived in early February. Ira took part in 2 demonstrations. I took part in just one. And that demonstration resulted in both of us being arrested as part of the demonstrating group, tried and convicted and sentenced to jail.
Dr. King was in Selma working with the SNCC people. He led 500 students in a march in downtown Selma, and most of them were arrested.
Before my 15th birthday, I had been jailed 9 times, and I often tell people they're looking at a proud jailbird. I say that because I did not go to jail for hurting anybody or doing anything to anybody. I went to jail for my beliefs. I remember the first time I actually went to jail, I started crying. And my friend Rubinell Brooks came over and started hugging me, and we started rocking, and somebody else was crying, and we comforted each other. But then all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, you crying and you're scared, and you'll hear somebody's voice booming, saying, "We shall overcome." And then everybody would start singing it. You know, that's how we held on and we fought together. I mean, nobody was a stranger. Kids from the county schools or from another county came, and we were all one.
The good part was about you were with friends, and the older children took care of us. If we started to cry, wanted to go home, they comforted us and made us feel like we were a part of it. They never discouraged us and let us get discouraged. They would put us in cells that was supposed to hold 1 to 2 people. I've never been in a cell that just seemed like it had 20 to 40 people all jammed up in it. Toilet was just right there. Nobody, with that many people in that room, you don't need to be anywhere near a toilet. The bed, they take the mattress off, and you just have that metal frame. You be sitting there on that metal frame. So when I tell that, I just say you either lucky or unlucky enough to get the bed. You didn't sit there long because the mattress was gone. The food, dry beans and peas. You can't just open the pack and put and boil the beans till they get soft. You got to pick out the stuff you can't eat. Nobody did that for us. I think they took pride in bringing you a rock sitting up on your plate with your beans. And those things were done to break our spirits.
It was 23 of us, girls, in a jail cell for 2. We had been there 3 days. And one of the girls, Patricia Green, she got real sick. She was really sick. And we called the jailer and told him she was sick and we needed some help. He brought brooms and mops and said the cell was dirty and we needed to clean it up, but saying nothing about helping Pat. So when you got on the top bunk, you could look across the catwalk was a window. So I took a broom handle, mop handle, one of them, and broke the window so they could hear us yell for help. The jailer came in and asked which one of us niggers had broke the window. Well, I didn't figure I was a nigger, so, because I had been taught I wasn't. So we didn't say anything. And then he said that if we didn't tell, he was gonna put us in a sweat box. Well, nobody knew what a sweat box was, but the way he said it was so menacingly that I figured I'd go on and tell him, you know. I say, I broke, and he, what's your name, nigger? And I say, Linda Blackman. And then somebody on my right said, my name's Linda Blackman. Somebody behind me said, you know, my name's Linda Blackman. It was about 5 Linda Blackmans that day. So he called us smart niggers, and he left one girl in the cell with Pat, and he took 21 of us and put us in this iron room. It was dark, airless. It was iron walls and iron floor. And that big door, when he closed, it was iron, and you couldn't see nothing. You couldn't, it was just hot and dry, and we all ended up fainting on each other or whatever. And when I woke up, the prisoners, because we were at the city jail, the prisoners was carrying us out into this courtroom where this judge, Bernard Reynolds, said we all stank. We need to get out of his courtroom, and if he ever write our names on a piece of paper that was on the table, and if he ever see any of us again, he was gonna put us in Mount Meigs, which was a juvenile detention home kind of thing. But we thought we would be smart. We thought, when I wrote my name, I wrote the Lone Ranger. Somebody wrote, they was Tonto and Minnie Mouse and Mickey Mouse, and we said, let him find them, because he wouldn't be finding us. Sometimes when I think about the things that we did, it becomes funny to me now, but it wasn't funny then.
Then in Marion, Alabama, which is not, is just about 25 miles from Selma, I think it was in late February, there was a program in a church in downtown Marion, in one of the black churches, and some people preaching and advocating for the Voting Rights Act. And essentially it was stormed by the local law enforcement. And in that ensuing battle, Jimmie Lee Jackson, who was a 26-year-old man from Marion, who had been in the military and had returned home. In that battle, he was killed.
They said that Jimmie Lee was there. He was attempting to protect his mother from the police, and the police killed him. That was during the same time that the demonstrations were going on in Selma.
I think we were at a mass meeting when we heard he had been shot and brought to Selma. We were amazed, at least I was, amazed at the people in Marion doing a night march. You know, you were gonna get us to do a night march in Selma.
Since this event was happening at night, guess what the police force did? They shot out the street lights, or turned the street lights off. Some report they shot them out, others said they turned them off. So it was pitch black dark, and you know, total turmoil, obviously. And that was when Jimmie Lee Jackson was killed. You didn't hear much about it, but the people in Selma started being really concerned. There were a lot of people very upset about this.
When things start happening, It's like these shootings today. When things start happening, things just wind out of control. And that's what happened that night in Marion with Jimmie Lee. And of course, it was something that the movement could use to make something good come of something that had happened very bad.
Jimmie Lee Jackson was murdered, and that was sort of the last straw.
I remember James Bevel. He wanted to take Jimmie Lee's body to Montgomery and put it on the Capitol steps. So they talked him out of that, but they said we would march. We would walk from Selma to Montgomery to let then Governor Wallace know that we were still here. Murder, no matter what, jail, we were still here, and we were fighting non-violently for the right to vote.
The Concerned White Citizens March in Selma was my mother's idea. And she was going to a lot of meetings, and of course things were really stepping up with the voters' rights marches in Selma. And one night, the young I think it was Hosea Williams, one of the young African-American activists came and talked to the group, and he told them the harassment that was going on with the black people in Selma marching day after day. My mother said, well, why don't a group of us white people go?
Hosea Williams was a fiery speaker. So when he got through, I said, well, how would it be if some white people went to Selma?
And so the real organizers and activists in the group got right on that.
A critical mass of people, 75 people did go, but 35 of them were Unitarians, a large portion from our church.
Most of the group came from Birmingham, although we had people from Tuscaloosa and outlying areas. It was the Birmingham group that had the opportunity to talk this through and to reinforce each other and encourage each other.
We met over at the Unitarian Church the morning of the march. This was the day before Bloody Sunday.
We went down in cars, I remember that. A lot of tension, a lot of nervousness.
No one knew what was going to happen, what the ramifications would be. It could have been an event similar to what happened to the Freedom Riders.
You know, everybody was scared. How could you not be scared? White people had been killed too.
We met at a black Presbyterian church. We walked into the church and the minister said, we've been waiting. We've been waiting for you a long time.
Said, we've been waiting 30 years for you to come. We lined up 2 by 2, 4 feet apart, as we were instructed to do, and marched from the little church to the courthouse.
Our goal was to walk to the courthouse where our leader would read a statement supporting voting rights, which of course the local black people had been fighting for very, very hard. And partway down the march, a white woman, this is again something I'll never forget, a white woman leaned to me, she said something really ugly and then spit in my face. And of course I kept marching, but we were all really, it was very frightening.
Oh, I remember walking down a sidewalk and a lot of white people yelling at us, some spitting a little bit. And one guy asked me, why don't you ask me to punch him so he could hit me back? But you know, we were actually trained to march. We had march training by the SCLC before the march. A guy named Al Lingo came over from Atlanta and taught us how to march. And I remember he had Frederick Krause up on stage, and he said, Fred, I want you to march across the stage. And Al walked and bumped into him. Fred stopped and turned around and said, don't stop and look at me, you're marching to the courthouse. In other words, just keep going.
I was on the outside of one of the rows. There were lots of white people jeering, calling, you know, making racist remarks. It was terrifying. You know.
The crowd was there and carrying on and throwing a smoke bomb or something.
On the one side of the street were at least 50 or 60 White Citizens Council types and Ku Klux Klan types. They had cars revved up with Limburger cheese on the manifold so that there was a lot of smoke that was being blown into our eyes.
The wind started blowing and all the smoke went back on the people who set it off.
And across the street was a group probably of 100, 150 blacks. And they were rather quiet as we demonstrated.
I had forgotten how many African Americans were there to support us, which was very brave, extremely brave.
Joel Wanger got up and read the statement that they had prepared.
Before we knew it, after we sang America and read our statement of concern, the redneck group began singing Dixie, and the blacks across the street began singing We Shall Overcome, and we had an interesting moment.
My mother heard this roar behind her, and at first she was scared. She thought, oh my God, the thugs are here. But she turned around slowly, and she said it looked like every black person in Selma had come out and formed this security line around them, several people deep.
And then we turned and marched back to the church. And we were told to get up quickly because people had been seen with clubs and what have you. And we got word that everyone had gotten back safely.
And I have often thought that that march angered people. The police and in Selma enough to where was partly responsible for the attack on Bloody Sunday.
In later years, my father had second thoughts and thought that perhaps he had helped contribute to the violence of the next day, that maybe seeing white people supporting integration had inflamed segregationists. I can't quite buy that. I just sort of think that that group was too puny to cause a whole lot of backlash.
I think there was a sense on the part of everybody that we are glad that we did what we did. We had no understanding at that point of what kind of publicity we might get, because we were really concerned that this message get across the country and reach even the White House as the Voting Rights Act was being considered.
My relatives in Newport News, Virginia told me they saw me on Huntley Brinkley. Because our march actually was national news, but was obviously overshadowed by the events of the next day.
The next day was the day that is what we know as Bloody Sunday. And all the people that had been working with Selma decided, well, we are going to march to Montgomery.
I had no idea there was a possibility of violence. My older sisters told me later that they talked about it in the church. I'm 11 years old. I was probably outside playing. And when they came out, I just hopped in the line, right? We lined up on the playground of George Washington Carver Homes, led by John Lewis and Hosea Williams. We came down Broad Street and over the bridge.
When we got to the apex of the bridge and could look over, there was just people in blue uniforms, but behind them was Sheriff Jim Clark and his deputies, and behind them was his posse, men on horseback.
When I crested the bridge, I was too far back in the line to hear or see what was happening. But I saw policemen lined all the way across all four lanes. I knew then that we were not going to Montgomery.
I heard these like gunshots pop, pop, pop. And all of a sudden there was this smoke coming up from the ground. We later found out it was tear gas, but you couldn't breathe, you couldn't see.
Before we could turn to run, it was too late. They came in from both sides, the front and the back, just beating people. People lay everywhere, not moving, as if they were dead, and you couldn't stop to help them or you'd be beaten too. If you could outrun the ones on foot, you couldn't outrun the ones on horses. They were running the horses into the crowd. People were being trampled, bones were being broken. You know what I remember the most? Screams. People were screaming and screaming and screaming. The last thing I remember is seeing this horse and this lady. The man on the horse hit her, and she fell, or I don't know what happened. I do know that I could still hear the sound her head made when it hit that pavement.
I felt someone pulling me back from the kneeling position, and I was resisting, and this person then took both hands and was jerking me back. Well, when he jerked me back, his hand just happened to come up by my mouth, and I bit him. I heard the word nigger twice, and he hit me twice. He pushed me forward, and then I was able to get up, and I started running, and I ran right into this cloud of tear gas, but this man was running behind me, hitting me. When I woke up, I was on a stretcher. They were trying to put me in the back of a hearse, and I told them I wasn't dead and I wasn't getting in there. And I got up and started running back across the bridge. But when I got back across the bridge, I stopped because I saw my 11-year-old sister, Joanne, in this man's arms, and she looked like a rag doll. She looked like she was dead. And all I could think about was that I was responsible for her and she was dead and I had got her killed. And I couldn't think of anything else. And it hasn't left me. That thought hasn't left my mind because I'm the oldest in my family and I am responsible for my siblings. And there she was, dead. And she was dead because she was following me. And I couldn't move. I couldn't move. Somebody must have pushed me or something, because I remember going to this man and telling him that was my sister and asking him if she was dead. And he said no, she had just fainted. And he had put her in this white car. And I went to this white car and I was calling her name and hitting her on the face. And she opened her eyes and they were so big and she just screamed.
I screamed because her face was covered with blood and her clothing. It scared me.
So I thought somebody was maybe behind me going to hit me, or something was happening, and I grabbed her hand and I started running.
And we just ran, trying to run home, but those same men followed us home.
The posse and state troopers was still hitting and running and hitting people.
The press was there, and having the press present at something can be really vital, because that Sunday afternoon it went all over the U.S. and then all over the world, pictures of state troopers attacking unarmed, innocent women, children, old, young, attacking them with their horses, riding on their horses, hitting them with billy clubs, spraying tear gas.
It was on television that we saw Jim Clark knock C.T. Vivian, with the SCLC, down the stairs of the courthouse. That and just pushing people around.
I remember getting a call from Eileen Walbert, and I get a little emotional thinking about it, but she called me and I answered the phone and she said, "Virginia, turn on your television. They're killing people in Selma." And what she meant, she meant the state troopers in the state. And so immediately we turned on our good old small black and white television, and lo and behold, in front of our eyes, were pictures of our state troopers, people we paid with our hard-earned salary, our taxes, pay their salary. They were trumping with their horses, they were trumping over people. And there was this carnage going on.
One thought I had at the time was that adults had lost control of themselves. Why was that? To me, something like Selma was like society was becoming unhinged, and there was something like a civil war going on, because you've got masses, you've got a large number of people, and they're in combat with essentially the army of the state, the state troopers.
It was an outrage, not just for us here in Alabama, but across the country. The aftershock of it was heard around the world.
There were so many people there from all over North America, and it got so much publicity, you know.
And then Dr. King that evening put out a call that for all the ministers who believe this is wrong, come to Selma and join us. If the church and all their proclamations of believing in brotherhood, and Unitarians believe in the dignity and worth of every human being, if we really believe that, put your feet on the ground.
Dr. King asked for everyone to come back on the following Tuesday.
There was massive response to Dr. King's call for people to come to Selma, clergy in particular.
The night before, we had happened to watch the evening news, and we saw the television account of the beatings at the bridge. We saw Sheriff Clark's posse ride among the demonstrators and the gassing that had taken place at the bridge. So when I arrived the next morning at headquarters, I wasn't surprised to hear about the telegram. I was ready. And I immediately got on the phone and I called ministers who were connected with our college programs all across the United States and Canada.
Story that my mother tells. She just told me that her and Dad were watching the news and they saw footage of Bloody Sunday and that they were obviously deeply disturbed, and my father was deeply upset over it, and she knew that Dad was going to have to get involved somehow. And then when Martin Luther King came and asked all clergymen to come and women to come and march, then he told my mother that he had to go.
Amongst the masses of black people, the question was, how are you going to get there? Not if you're going to go, but how are you going to go? If there was going to be a mass march, if you had any conscience of civil rights, you were going to be there, no matter what.
We were met at the airport in Montgomery by people from Selma. They knew that there would be some response to that telegram that Martin Luther King had sent. And they sent cars, they sent trucks. I remember riding in the car to Selma, a truck in front of us, an open flatbed truck with a lot of ministers sitting on the flatbed going on to Selma.
David and I went back with other members of the Unitarian Church, and we gathered on this field near Brown's Chapel in Selma.
We waited and we waited at Brown's Chapel for the word to come that we could finally march. And when the word finally came, we were ready, we were eager, and we marched.
And to me, it looked like an army. I think someone said that there were around, from 2,000 to 3,000 people.
The numbers were important. That's what the president noticed, is these huge numbers. How did all of these people dare to look death in the face? And yet that's what we did. The second march on Selma, we had a parade permit that allowed the marchers to parade on the street, not the curb. Lined on the curb were the Klan, the John Birch Society, state troopers, with axe handles, knives, guns, shotguns, and if you so much as laid a foot on that curb, you were going to get beaten. My job was to run from the front of the bridge to the back of the bridge to make sure that there was a little bit of space where the marchers would not step onto the curb. You know, the haters on the curb were doing their best to intimidate us, and they were calling us pretty vulgar names and I dare you type things so that they could they wanted to start trouble. And it was my training to ignore it and ignore it fully. You just don't even stop to participate. But I heard more than I care to repeat.
And I remember we were expecting tear gas, and there was this, so people started handing out handkerchiefs. They said, you wet the handkerchief when there's tear gas and put it over your face. So we all got our wet handkerchiefs ready before the march, and then about 30 minutes later they came around, no, that's wrong. That's the worst thing you can do. Don't use the wet handkerchief.
We lined up again, 2 by 2, and marched across the Pettus Bridge to the Pettus Bridge.
And I remember looking up at that bridge, which just seemed huge, and it had this bend that goes up over the river, and you couldn't see the other side over the bridge. But we marched up, wondering what's on the other side. What are we going to confront? And as soon as we got to the top, then we saw what we were going to confront. You could see the line of state troopers with their blue helmets lined up. And so we knew there was going to be a confrontation.
We were faced with the same sea of blue, state troopers, and they told Dr. King that there would be no marching from Selma to Montgomery that day. Dr. King knelt and prayed. He got up. We turned around and went back to the church.
We had only gotten halfway up the bridge when we saw everyone coming back. And that's how it got the name Turnaround Tuesday. But we had no idea what it was all about.
All of a sudden, I realized that the people in front were turning around and coming back. And I was aghast. What is going on? Are we not going to go through with this confrontation? What's happening? Well, when we got back to Brown's Chapel after the turnaround march, we waited to hear Dr. King's explanation of why this had been. And he did attempt to explain that, though, and we never fully understood what had gone on in the negotiations behind the scenes, which became quite evident later.
He was under an injunction not to march at that time. The Department of Justice, in order to be on the side of blacks and on the side of civil rights, had to be enforcing the law. And if Dr. King or others violated the law, then we would be in the unpleasant position of having to prosecute them. And that was what we were trying to avoid.
Well, we did understand Dr. King saying, as many of you as can, could you stay a few more days? Could you remain? So a number of us decided to stay, I among them. And those of us from the Unitarian Universalists had gathered outside of Brown's Chapel as a group to kind of compare notes, decide who's going to stay, who can, who can't. And I remember that Jim Reeb was a part of the group. In fact, I had a little Minox camera with me, and I took a picture of the group, and it turned out it was the last picture ever taken of Jim. But he decided to stay, and a mutual friend of ours, Clark Olson, had just arrived, and the three of us decided to have dinner together. We'd been told that we should not try to eat in the white community downtown, but some of the black restaurants, and we were given instructions where we might find those. And so we went to Walker's Cafe and found a lot of our colleagues there. After we had eaten, we agreed that the shortest way back to Brown's Chapel was to turn right, and we did, and started walking down the street. From across the street, there appeared 4 or 5 white men, and they yelled at us, "Hey, you niggers." And one of them was carrying a club. And Clark said he turned around and saw the club just as it was swung. And Jim Reeb, being closest to the curb, caught the full impact of that blow, the side of his head. I shouted, and I guess shouted for help probably, and they disappeared almost as quickly as they'd come. I don't think the attack lasted more than maybe 40 seconds. After they left, we got up from the sidewalk, and Jim couldn't stand by himself. We lifted him up. So we guided him between us. He was able to stumble along and walk to some degree around the corner past what I guess was the Blue Moon Cafe and on around to Boynton's insurance office where we went to get help. And it was a good place to go because Diane Bevel was there.
And she told the story of them coming in when Dad was still coherent, and Diane saying, she said, your dad acted like he was okay, but everyone knew that he wasn't. He was groggy and losing sort of consciousness. They were holding on to him.
And Diane called an ambulance immediately, and we were taken to the Burwell Infirmary, where Dr. Dinkins attempted to take an x-ray of Jim, but Dr. Dinkins could ascertain even in that moment that there was more there than he could possibly handle, that he needed a surgeon immediately. And so he put in a call to University Hospital in Birmingham, which was 65 miles away, I guess, something like that. And Jim was put back into the ambulance. By this time, he was unconscious.
They had just finished dinner, which is key because his stomach was full. And then he was beat up primarily with, including a lot of blows to the head, skull fracture in particular. They put him in an ambulance. It broke down. So they had to get another ambulance, which was a big delay.
We started out again in the second ambulance, and the carrier that Jim was lying on didn't fit the second ambulance, and I remember having to hold it as we went around the curves, and we careened around those curves at 60 and 70 miles an hour on the back roads until we finally got to a main highway. We actually hit 110 miles an hour at one point, heading for Birmingham.
The call came from Selma that Reverend Reeb was on his way to the hospital in Birmingham. At a board meeting at the church, I think that was where they were called, is what I'm told. And one of the board members that was part of our church was one of the top physicians at the university hospital here. So he immediately called Dr. Volker, who was also a member of our church. And so they immediately paved the way so that when Reverend Reeb arrived, he got all the treatment that was available. Everything was made clear for him.
I got a call from the hospital, said, somebody's been injured and you need to come right away. So I drive down and park in my parking lot, and I have trouble getting into the emergency department through all the press, cameras, people, everything, because of that delay, a lot of the press people had congregated around the door of the emergency department, and I had trouble getting in the emergency department because of that. Once he arrived and we got him in the trauma room, I remember this vividly, I was standing over his head. Dr. Stanley Graham was the neurosurgeon. We called him in because of the skull fracture, and there was a surgery resident on the right of the patient, and I looked up, and there were television cameras going right there in the doorway. The nurse couldn't walk across the room and get us sutures because the press were in the room.
And the hospital staff, I didn't know what really to expect, but as it turned out, the hospital staff was, like most people, very mixed in their reactions about these civil rights demonstrations. The person in charge at that time happened to be a Unitarian, member of the congregation in Birmingham, but he couldn't have done more to help us than he did. He was wonderful. And the hospital made available space for us. We were not patients, Clark and I, Clark Olson and myself. And we felt that while Jim's life was hanging in the balance, the thing that we best could do was to get the word out as to what had happened and why we were there, and to make Jim's life count for something if it was going to be lost. And we were pretty certain he was not going to survive. Marie finally arrived, Marie Reeb, Jim's wife.
She came to Birmingham and met my grandfather. They talked and they both saw Dad, and they knew that he was just being kept alive by the machines and keeping him breathing, and they knew that he was actually gone. So they made the decision to take him up the respirator.
I'll never forget Marie's asking us to come and tell her about what had happened. And so we sat down with Marie and step by step tried to explain what had happened, the restaurant and the attack and the march. And I remember saying to Marie as we finished, Marie, thank you for sharing Jim with us. He was the right man at the right place at the right time. Marie wasn't ready for that. It was a harsh thing to say to her, and I regretted it later. But now I know that I did say the right thing, because he was the right man at the right place at the right time.
He was courageous in his convictions and determined in fulfilling his destiny. I really do believe that was his destiny.
We had a vigil at 6th Avenue Baptist Church. And at this time, 16th Street Church had been bombed, and there were 2 aisles in the church. And across the front, were, I don't know how many number of ministers and prominent people. And I was sitting on the left side, and we were having this vigil for Reeb's recovery. And I saw someone on the left walk down the aisle and approach the person sitting on the left side of the stage and passed him a note. It was passed across the aisle, and then the last person, announced that Reeb had died.
I went back. I was there for the memorial service. I sat in the balcony the whole time. It was a marvelous service. It lasted about 3 hours. There were representatives there from many, many denominations. There was a rabbi, I recall. There was a Catholic priest. There was a Russian Orthodox primate there. And of course, our own representatives. Dana Greeley, the president of our association, was there as our main spokesperson. And there were many, many speeches. But of course, Dr. King's was the highlight. And one of the things he did that I will never forget and always have been very happy that he did, it wasn't a memorial service just for James Reeb. It was also a memorial service for another Jimmie, Jimmie Lee Jackson, a black man who had been killed just 2 weeks before, involved in some of the same demonstrations there in Dallas County. And so he linked the 2 together. Black and white together. The 2 Jims.
President Johnson sent my mother flowers, and there was no flowers for Jimmie Lee Jackson's family.
I think Ann said it to you. Our grandma, I think, does struggle with that. It's a very difficult thing for her to, understandably, to process, is that I think probably, unfortunately, a sense of guilt in a way that, and just sadness that Jimmie Lee's family and other families of the movement, it did not get the same sort of outcrying of love.
It's a terrible thing to have to say, but for some reason it took the death of a white clergyman to turn things around. You talked about Tuesday as being turnaround day, and it was. It wasn't just the turnaround of the march at the bridge, though. It was the turnaround of how America saw the civil rights struggle.
Miller and Olson have this deep sense of, I could have been just as easily killed. And it changed their lives. I think it changed the lives of all of us that were part of this.
It's something that has become greater than itself. It's he was a martyr for a reason, and it's unexplainable, and it's tragic, and it's sad, but greater good came out of it.
When Jim Reeb was killed in Selma, Alabama, a white clergyman from the North, people suddenly sat up and took notice. And from then on, things changed in the movement. People came from all over the country to Selma. Selma became a flood of demonstrators. And people went to Washington, and they waited upon President Johnson. Ministers came to the White House, and Johnson rightly said, "Where have you been all these years?" And where had we been? Well, we finally woke up, and it was Jim's death that woke us up. Well, as a result of all that, eventually even the courts came around, and the march was permitted to happen from Selma to Montgomery.
By March 17th, Frank Johnson, our Judge Frank Johnson, a federal judge, determined that the people of Selma did have a right to march.
He signed the order that we could walk from Selma to Montgomery with protection. Then President Johnson federalized the Alabama National Guard, and they were to protect us.
Judge Frank Johnson said that 300 people could march the whole distance, and it was determined it would take about 4 days. There had to be a lot of determination of, okay, which 300 people can actually march the whole distance? Because there was no way they could have guarded with the National Guards thousands of people.
My name got on the list of 300 that were allowed to walk from Selma to Montgomery. On March 21st, we left Selma walking, led by Dr. King.
A lot of us marched not only over the bridge, which is what a lot of people did, and stopped there because it was symbolic, but they continued to march all the way to the Capitol and would stop and either camp out along the way, or really, since a lot of them lived down there, they would just go home and come back to wherever they left off the day before and keep on going. So just to make sure everybody knew that, yes, 40 miles is a long way to hike, but we are committed to that, and we will do that.
On March 22nd, that was my 15th birthday. And I woke up in that tent, and you couldn't tell me anything. I was 15. I walked out of the tent, and I focused on these 3 guardsmen. They were right in front of me and the tent. And on the end of the guns were the bayonets. And it seemed like they were looking just at me. And all of a sudden, I got terrified because I thought that they were there to finish the job they had started 2 weeks before, on the 7th, beating me. I just knew that they were there and they was gonna kill me. Ran back into that tent yelling for Miss Mary not to let them kill me. And I remember this one guy, Jim Letherer. Jim was a veteran that had lost a leg in a war. And he was marching on his crutches from Selma to Montgomery. And Jim said, before he let anybody else harm another hair on my head, he would lay down and die for me. Now, I'm gonna tell you, that was kind of tempting. I wanted to see that white man die for me. I mean, it's funny now that I think of it, but all I wanted to do for that morning was to get back to 138C GWC Homes, to my daddy. But then I could hear my grandmother in my head. And grandma used to say things like, if you let something rule you, it'll rule you for your life. And that was that fear. I couldn't let fear take over, because if fear took over, I wouldn't be Linda anymore. That's the way I felt. And grandmother always taught us to be determined to finish whatever you start, no matter what the outcome is. And that's what, I had to do. I left out of that tent that day, marching with Jim Lethbridge down that highway, and I made the entire 54-mile march.
The march from Selma to Montgomery, from my perspective, was a job. We had 300 people to feed every day. And we had to find a place to pitch tents. And we had to be concerned about security. Some days we did 10, 12 miles, some days we did as many as 18 miles. And so it was really work. There was a group of ministers from this group that had turned around, who stayed, and who basically provided, they were sort of the quartermaster corps. They provided the services. They took care of the tents. They arranged to move the blankets from place to place. But it was a tremendous logistical operation.
A great deal of profanity was yelled at from the passing cars, and the old farmers came out, mostly white people, and they looked at us with utter disdain. But we knew that the victory was in sight.
And I think we all walked that day, those days really, with a sense of pride and with a sense of dignity. And I will never forget, there was a little song that one of the guys would sing, "Pick 'em up, put 'em down, all the way from Selma town." It was like a holy crusade. It was like Gundy's March to the Sea, really. It was something in the air. It was something within all of us that sort of pushed us, that took us along. You didn't get tired. You really didn't get weary. You had to go. It was more than an ordinary march. To me, there was never a march like this one before. There hadn't been one since. We literally, in my estimation, wrote the Voting Rights Act with our blood and with our feet.
And that Friday, my dad took the rest of us over to Montgomery, to St. Jude, where we spent the night.
Some of the movie stars who had been supporting and so forth were going to come into Montgomery that night to perform on the field out behind St. Jude. And it was a wonderful show. Harry Belafonte, Shelley Winters, Peter, Paul, and Mary. I mean, they were all coming in. The crowd of people behind St. Jude in the huge fenced-in field were enjoying the show. There were some guys in pickup trucks driving around the periphery there in that area behind St. Jude, which is predominantly a black community at the time. And we could tell that they were either just observing or had some other things in mind. So we pair up into four and stay back at the periphery of each of the corners and around the barriers of the fence there so we could alert somebody. We wouldn't think about the police because we didn't know if they'd be supportive at all. Montgomery City Police made themselves scarce that night. When the trucks would drive by, we'd all walk up and just kind of stare them down. We don't know what, if anything, that was all about, but we felt it's an obligation. And the show went on.
I went with a group. It would have been Unitarians. I can't remember who else was with us. And my spotty memory, the thing that stands out was the huge crowd. It was dark. And we remember walking along with some people, and they pointed to a little trailer sort of thing, and they said, James Baldwin is in there.
When we got to Montgomery, John Doerr came to me and said, look, we understand that there's a plot on Martin Luther King's life. And we just told him we thought that he needed to ride and didn't tell him the reasons. And he said no, he wanted to walk. He was going to walk on in with everybody else. And so finally then we told him what the situation was. He said he didn't care. He still wanted to walk. I think when we finally got through, I mean, that created a kind of tension where you're looking around and you never know where a bullet's coming from.
And then to be a part of the group going into the city, and as people stood on their doorsteps, their front porches, and they cheered us on and waved flags for us. And some of them even decided, we got to be part of this too, and they joined the march.
A lot happened on that day. Students emptied out Alabama State, and it was a big crowd who came over. Fairview joined the march, Cleveland Avenue going downtown. So when we got down there, it was a throng of people.
Oh, there were thousands, I guess. What I've seen anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 people ended up being there. And among them were hundreds and hundreds, probably 1,000 Unitarians. Now, from around the country came.
You know, all along the way they were saying, you know, keep going, you know, right on, and just cheering us on, you know. It was really, really fun.
Well, I was there with lots of other Unitarian Universalists and people of many denominations, but the people who had been on the whole march, they were the wonderful people. Those black kids and the demonstrators from families in Selma that had put their whole lives on the line to be a part of that march.
And when you finally got downtown to the state capitol and past the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, and you could see the Capitol and you knew you'd sort of made it, I think then I just really then felt, you know, filled with joy.
I felt real good at the last march, at the point where it was like we had overcome. We had reached the point in which we were fighting for a long time. And if you were to just stand there in the midst of thousands and thousands of people and all of the great leaders and political people who have come from all over the world, it was just a thrill.
It was a great feeling to be in Montgomery, the capital of the Confederate, to stand there where Jeff Davis stood, to stand where Wallace stood back in 1963 and said, segregation now, segregation forevermore. And to stand there with more than 20,000 people who said that we would never make it there. And to listen to Martin Luther King Jr., it was a moving feeling. I knew then it was just a matter of time that we would get to go to the next time.
It was just a glorious victory march from Selma to Montgomery.
But there was the woman that was down in Lowndes County, the Unitarian who had come from Michigan and was working with some of the people in Lowndes County. She was driving people from the march. And it was, again, a black and white group that attracts attention. Man, that was like the Klans people, or the Klan type could see that like a mile away if you were a black and white group together in a car. They were looking for it. And she got killed. And so that was just another disaster.
First, I have to say that we were not surprised that our mother went to Selma. Often, one of the questions I'm asked more than anything is, why did she go to Selma? And a lot of times it was actually an accusation. Why did she go to Selma? And at the point of her death, the moment she died, there was just a flutter of media people and activity around the house. And then mail started being delivered in huge mail sacks. And there were a lot of condolences and a lot of love and you know, concern and offers to help. But it was also full of hate mail. And what happened at that point was, we have never in our life, as white kids growing up in a white middle-class neighborhood with white parents, I mean, other than my mother being different, our lives were really very normal and very ideal. And the hatred that was spewed on us totally shocked me. I had no experience of that. And in the process, we both realized, though, that that's how black people experience that hate on a daily basis. And it was like just a slap.
Like Mary said, you know, some people embraced us. Others really hated us. They burned crosses, they shot bullets through our window, they threw trash on our yard. They came to bust our door down one night. You know, Penny was there and Tommy was there and I was there, and here come these two big thugs started. Just happened to walk by, the door was open, and saw these two big men start running up the walk towards the door. Penny slammed the door. Tommy ran in the bedroom and grabbed Dad's .38. And from that point on, we had armed guards for 2 years lived in our house.
She was slandered. In fact, J. Edgar Hoover started a smear campaign. He said she had marks on her arms that looked as if she could be taking dope, and that she was sitting so close to the Negro in the car it had the appearance of a necking party. Well, none of that was accurate. Her autopsy didn't show anything like that, and even the fact that the autopsy was an intent to find some kind of wrong with her, it was one thing after another like that. Her car was put on, somebody sent us an article where her car was being sold as a real crowd getter, complete with bullet holes and blood. And even to the extent that my little sister Sally was stoned by adults, you know, calling her an lover's baby, and your mother was a whore, and she was 6 years old. And this was Detroit, you know, this was the North.
Oh, they made her into a prostitute. She had as big a heart as anybody. And they had to make her into worthy of the death.
Yeah, you know what? They tried to trash her, but they made her more popular. Viola was something else. She just come on out there. She was in it. She didn't care about what you thought or what you didn't think. You think what you want to do, but you better be trying to keep up with her because she's gonna do.
I told you that one of the questions that we were asked so often, and that was kind of an accusation more than a question, was why did your mother go to Alabama? And it was something I thought about for decades, really, you know. And then I was thinking, well, she went to Alabama because Dr. King invited her. In fact, he invited the whole American people to please, if you know this is wrong, come help. And my mom, I realized that what it was about my mom, like people say, what was it, what was it? Well, if my mother saw an opportunity to interfere with suffering, whether it was an animal or a plant or a human being, she never thought about what to do. She was going to do whatever she could do to stop that suffering.
Yeah, she didn't even think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I really don't even think she thought about
Yeah.
it. She just would see something that was out of the ordinary or something that she felt was wrong, something that she could possibly try to help, and she would do it.
Yeah.
I mean, there was just no, it wasn't even like it would be a thought. It would just be there. It would be natural that she would go and help.
And it was people like the people that were on that bridge that day. She watched that. That's why she went. And isn't the real question, why wasn't everybody there? Everybody in this country that watched their fellow people being massacred. You know, my mom's life really clears her name. It was really hard because, like Tony said, when you read the things that were being said about her, you want to go, wait, you know, that's not who my mom was. Then when she was in Selma, we talked to people. You know what she did? They said, my friend, Joanne Bland, she said, little kids, the young people, she was 11, she said, we followed your mom around like ducks because she listened to us and she talked to us and she treated us like people. And then the family she was staying with, the woman had a 17-year-old daughter, and this is how I knew this woman was telling me true stories, because the daughter called me just a few years ago, and she says, you know, your mother fed my baby his first bite of solid food. Her baby wouldn't stop crying, and she said, honey, your baby's hungry. And she said, your mother went down to the store and came back with all this baby food and put the baby on her lap and fed him his first bite of solid food. That's what she was doing while she was in Selma. She wasn't running around trying to sleep with black men, which is what they said the whole march was about, and she wasn't trouble raising. And this one thing Joanne said about her too was, she said she was a man's woman, and she said by that I mean she had opinions and she wanted to talk about them, and she was up talking with them about the men. Well, in 1965, that was not a very good picture of a woman, you know? You know, it's 50 years later, there's a woman in particular in Selma, And she says quite bluntly that she can tell you what my mother was. She was nothing but a hardcore prostitute. And she says, now I'm not saying that means she should have been killed. Don't go putting it on film that I'm saying she should have been killed. But she was saying that. She got what she deserved. And at first I was seeking a way to do something to her. And I even had this idea that I was going to get all these pictures of us as kids and pictures of her as our mother and go to her and try to talk to her about, hey, she was a mother, you know. And the Southern Poverty Law Center said, don't go near him. And I just thought, after all these years, why do they still want to do that? And then I thought, you know what? If they're still after her 50 years later, there's something about her that they don't want to continue. And I hope they're after her 50 years from now, too. You know, they thought they were going to squash something out, and they have created a force that I don't think anybody recognizes with young people. There were women in the Women's March in January carrying around signs, I am Viola, and you know, we got emails and texts from all over with her picture, and this one little gal that she did a little documentary, and she works in Washington, and she every time she votes, she sends me a text and says, thank you, Viola. Thank you, you know, she's a young black girl. And everything that happened since when somebody won, Cicely Tyson, I think, or won the Academy Award, or something new happens I see my mom there, you know. I get letters from young women in overseas in London and things wanting to know more about this woman. People love her because she wasn't an organizer, she wasn't an activist, so to speak. She was a mother. John Lewis said that. He said there are people who are called to get in the way, you know. And he said your mother got in the way. And that, I believe that was her destiny.
And we both worked, and my whole family works, to write her name and to right the wrongs that are still going on today. I look around and things are just reversing. The Civil Rights Act, everything is going backwards. And it's up to us to step up again and say, you know, not now, not ever. Jimmie Lee Jackson was murdered. Reverend Reeb was murdered. But when Viola was murdered, it shocked the nation. And it's sad that it took the death of a white woman to shock the nation enough, because so many African Americans have given their life for the rights, basic rights. I mean, the right to drink out of a drinking fountain, for God's sake. But it took Viola's death to shock the nation enough and shock Congress enough to get the votes to pass the Voting Rights Act.
Yes, it took the death of white people to cause a national outcry. Then it could sort of turn the page on President Johnson to go before Congress. You can imagine from the African American community that while they so love James Reeb that he stood up, that he came, Viola that she came, you know, there's still that double-edged sword almost in a way for them to think of that Jimmie Lee Jackson was killed, was murdered. His death went unnoticed.
Too much blood was shed, too many people's lives, too many people we don't even know about were killed.
But you know, every person that got up out of their chairs then and now took the same risk. Right. Any one of them could have been. I always say, Mom went to and marched into history. She walked in the march, and you know, but it can happen to any person who makes the effort to get up out of their chair and say, "Oh, count me, I'm with them." The Voting Rights Act was signed on August 6, 1965. That was my sister Sally's 7th birthday.
The Voting Rights Act made a huge difference. It made America more America.
Even though we couldn't vote, most of us, because at the time, the voting age was 21, we knew we had changed, you know, things for the better, just like the children in Birmingham in 1963 changed the segregation laws. We had changed the voting laws. It was just, again, An awesome feeling.
What even made it so unique to me was the fact, just something being so simple, just a check on the ballot. At that particular time, they didn't have the machines, they had to check. And I thought it was a long, drawn-out thing because of how people had to really fight for that, you know? And it was just a matter of walking over to a building and them making their checks. My most vivid memories is when I asked my mother and father for my birthday present to become registered voters. And as a matter of fact, after they had become registered voters, they took me to the polls with them to vote. I would never forget it.
How long? Not long. Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Yes, how long? Not long. Not long. Because mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Yes, he's trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. Yes, sir. He's loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. Yes, his truth is marching on. Yes, sir. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, hallelujah. Yes, sir. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. His truth
A lot of people fought hard, lost their lives, were really mistreated just to get something simple like the right to vote. And that's the history of African Americans, to get the simple things in life.
People have died who's trying to get our voting right. And people should get out and vote.
When the Birmingham 16th Street Church was bombed, Diane Nash said, we knew who the killers were. And she said we could kill them or we could vote. And we chose the vote.
You can't change the system if you're not in the system. You can't sit back and just complain about it. You got to get in there and where you could be able to change it.
What we have to do here in Alabama is we have to get all the registered people that we can register and then get them to the polls to vote.
A voteless man is a hopeless man, and that is true. If you don't vote, you're hopeless.
When you become of age to register to vote, vote because your vote counts. Every vote counts, and if you don't vote, you can't expect anything to happen for you because you're not even a part of it, because you ain't even vote to become a part of it. No, I'm going to go. If I'm crippled, I'm going to vote.